The auditorium was thick with anticipation, cameras flashing like lightning as the debate stage lights glared on two figures who defined America in profoundly different ways. On one side stood Barack Obama, composed, calm, and deliberate in his movements, every gesture measured, his gaze steady, as if he could see straight through the crowd's noise into the heart of the matter. On the other stood Donald Trump, blustering, restless, unable to resist the urge to interrupt, to dominate, to bend the conversation toward himself. The moderators had already lost control 3 times in the past hour, their carefully prepared questions shredded in the crossfire of insults and sharp exchanges. But the tension reached its boiling point when Trump, in a tone dripping with condescension, leaned toward his microphone and smirked. You know, Barack, maybe if Michelle wasn't so angry all the time, people would actually listen to her. I mean, let's be honest. She comes across harsher than Hillary. Real men don't like women like that. Gasps shot through the crowd like an electric current. And even the moderators froze, unsure whether to interject or let the spectacle unfold. Obama's eyes narrowed ever so slightly, his hands still clasped on the podium, but his jaw tightened in a way that signaled a storm was coming. The silence lasted only seconds, but it stretched like eternity in the charged atmosphere. Trump, mistaking the pause for weakness, pressed on with a sneer. I mean, look at her. She talks about hope and inspiration, but honestly, if she wasn't married to you, Barack, nobody would even care. She'd just be another loudmouth with a grudge against men. The laughter of a few died. Hard Trump supporters punctured the heavy quiet, but most of the audience remained dead still, waiting for Obama's reply. Then, with a calm so sharp it cut through the tension like a blade, Obama leaned forward and spoke, his voice lower than usual, deliberate, like a judge handing down a verdict. Donald, you can attack me all you want. You can call me names, insult my policies, rewrite history to fit your ego. But the moment you drag Michelle into your cheap circus, you cross a line you don't understand. You see, Michelle isn't just my wife. She's a woman who grew up on the south side of Chicago, who worked her way from humble beginnings to Princeton and Harvard Law without your father's millions or your golden parachutes. She raised 2 daughters while carrying the weight of a nation's expectations, and she did it with more grace than you could ever comprehend. You call that anger, I call it strength. And the truth is, Donald, you're terrified of women like her because they remind you of everything you'll never be. The audience erupted into applause, so loud the moderators' earpieces buzzed. Trump's face flushed red, his mouth twitching as if forming words he couldn't quite push out. He slammed a hand against his podium. That's ridiculous, Barack! Nobody's buying your sob story. Michelle is unpopular because she's unlikable, plain and simple. People want strength, Not lectures! Obama raised a finger, silencing the crowd instantly, his voice cutting through Trump's bluster. Strength. Is that what you call mocking women, belittling their intelligence, and reducing them to whether or not men find them attractive? Let me tell you something, Donald. Real strength isn't yelling louder than everyone else in the room. It isn't calling people names on Twitter at 3 a.m. It isn't hiding behind money, lawyers, or family connections. Real strength is showing respect even when you disagree. Real strength is building others up, not tearing them down to hide your own insecurities. And Michelle, my wife, has more of that strength in her little finger than you've shown in your entire life. The crowd was now on its feet, the roar droning out, even the moderator's pleas for order. Trump gripped the edges of his podium like it was the only thing anchoring him, his face contorting in rage. Don't lecture me, Obama! I built an empire! I became president when everyone said I couldn't. Nobody respects women more than me, believe me! His voice cracked on the last words, the bravado faltering under the weight of the moment. Obama didn't flinch. He simply shook his head slowly, the disappointment on his face speaking louder than words. Then, with a calm finality, he delivered a line that hung in the air like a gavel strike. Donald, respect isn't something you shout about. It's something people feel when you walk into the room. And right now, the only thing people feel is shame for the way you've chosen to speak about women, including my wife. You've told on yourself tonight, and the whole world is watching. The energy in the auditorium had shifted entirely, as though the air itself had grown heavier with consequence. Trump's words, intended as a weapon, now hung like an open wound across the stage, the audience still buzzing from Obama's cutting response. The moderators tried desperately to regain control, but the crowd wasn't interested in policy questions anymore. They wanted to see what would happen next. Trump, restless and cornered, leaned back into the microphone with a mocking laugh that sounded more nervous than confident. You're good with words, Barack, I'll give you that. But words don't run countries. Words don't fix economies. And words sure as hell don't stop wars. Michelle can give all the speeches she wants, but she doesn't change anything. She's just your PR shield, your accessory. He spat the last word as though it were venom, as if reducing Michelle Obama to nothing more than a decorative ornament would somehow claw back his advantage. But instead of applause, his words met silence, a silence so profound, even his own supporters shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Obama turned his head slowly, studying Trump as if he were examining a man unraveling in real time. His voice, when it came, was calm, quiet, but laced with a heat that burned deeper than shouting ever could. Donald, the only accessory I see here is you. An accessory to corruption, to division, to the cheapening of the very office you claim to honor. You think Michelle is a shield. Michelle is a sword. She speaks truth, whether people want to hear it or not. And unlike you, she doesn't need to inflate her worth with lies. Every time she speaks, young girls believe they can achieve more. Every time she walks into a room, she carries the hopes of families who never had a voice in the White House before. You dismiss that because you can't measure it in money or television ratings. But the rest of us know it's called leadership, something you've mistaken for self-promotion your entire life. The eruption of applause was deafening, but this time it wasn't just noise. It was conviction, the kind of roaring approval that felt like history was shifting in the room. Trump clenched his jaw and fired back, his tone wobbling between anger and desperation. You're just jealous. Barack, jealous because I did what you couldn't. I made America respected again. I filled stadiums. I broke records. I dominated the media. Michelle, she just complains. She complains about food, about school lunches, about America not being fair enough. People are tired of it. They want winners, not whiners. Obama raised an eyebrow, letting the audience absorb Trump's words before he delivered his counter like a boxer waiting for the perfect opening. Winners. Obama repeated, his voice dripping with incredulity. Donald, if winning means tearing down kids who look up to you, mocking disabled reporters, insulting veterans who've sacrificed everything, and belittling women who dare to stand up to you, then I'll proudly be a so-called loser in your book, because real victory isn't measured by the size of the crowd you attract, but by the quality of the lives you improve. Michelle didn't complain when she launched initiatives to fight childhood obesity. She fought for children's health while you were fighting lawsuits from contractors you refused to pay. She didn't complain when she stood with military families, making sure their sacrifices weren't forgotten, while you mocked prisoners of war and called them weak. And she sure didn't complain when she became the most admired woman in America year after year. She doesn't complain, Donald, she leads. And that's why you feel threatened. The words sliced through the hall with surgical precision. And Trump's face betrayed the cracks beneath his bluster. He pointed a finger across the stage, his voice rising into a near shout. Don't you dare tell me I'm threatened by your wife! She's nothing compared to the women who stand by me. She's a phony, Barack, and deep down you know it. That was the breaking point. Obama's expression shifted, the calm veneer giving way to something raw, something deeply personal. He stepped away from his podium for the first time, closing the physical distance between them just enough to command the entire room's attention. His voice was no longer calm. It was thunder wrapped in steel. Donald, you don't get to talk about my wife like that. Not here, not ever. Michelle is not just my wife. She's a black woman in America who has endured every insult, every stereotype, every smear people like you have thrown at her, and she rose above it with dignity. She stood tall while you and your allies questioned my citizenship, called her an angry black woman, mocked her appearance. She didn't just survive it, she transformed it into a platform that lifted millions of others. And you think you can dismiss her with one careless insult? No. Tonight you've revealed exactly who you are. Donald, you're a bully who feels small in the presence of greatness, and you lash out because you can't stand to see a woman outshine you. The crowd exploded with cheers, chants of Michelle, Michelle, echoing through the auditorium, shaking the very foundations of the hall. Trump's mouth opened and closed, but no words came. For the first time, the self-proclaimed master of comebacks was left speechless, his arsenal of insults useless against the force of Obama's conviction. The moderators tried again to move the debate forward, but it was too late. The story had already crystallized in real time. A sitting former president standing up, not just for his wife, but for every woman ever belittled, dismissed, or mocked by men who confused cruelty for strength. And in that moment, the nation understood they weren't witnessing a debate. They were witnessing a reckoning. The air inside the auditorium had become a living, breathing thing, thick with tension, fueled by outrage, and electrified by the sense that something irreversible was happening before everyone's eyes. The cameras zoomed in on Trump, who was visibly rattled, tugging at his collar as beads of sweat formed on his brow. He leaned toward the microphone again, his voice cracking before he steadied it. "You're a fraud, Obama. You and Michelle, frauds. You pretend to care about ordinary people, but you're elitists. You lived in the White House. You rubbed shoulders with Hollywood. You made millions writing books. Don't stand there and lecture me about dignity while you get rich off your own name." His words carried venom, but not conviction. The crowd didn't erupt this time. They groaned, some even booed, the tide of the audience turning on him like a storm rolling over a fragile ship. Obama, however, didn't rush to respond. He let the moment stretch, let Trump's words echo, and die out in the silence, a silence that grew louder than any applause. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower now, deliberate, each word cutting sharper because of its restraint. "Donald, the difference between you and me is simple. Michelle and I never pretended to be perfect. We never pretended to be flawless. We owned our mistakes, we learned from them, and we grew. You build entire monuments to your ego just to avoid admitting you were wrong about the smallest thing. You call people frauds because you can't imagine a world where someone's influence isn't bought, isn't manipulated, isn't scripted for profit. You think authenticity is a scam because you've never experienced it yourself. The crowd erupted again. Applause rolling like thunder. But Obama wasn't finished. His eyes locked onto Trump's, narrowing with focus. You bring up Michelle as if she's your punching bag. But here's the truth. Michelle didn't need the White House to matter. Long before that, she was mentoring students, building community programs, fighting to give kids in Chicago a chance at a better life. And long after politics, she's still doing it. She's not a fraud, Donald. She's a force. And forces like her don't fade because someone with a microphone and an ego tries to belittle them. The applause swelled again. But this time, it was mixed with chants, a wave that began in the back rows and rippled forward until the entire auditorium was on its feet. Michelle! Michelle! The sound was deafening, drowning out everything else. And for the first time in his career, Trump looked genuinely unsettled, his bluster faltering under the weight of collective defiance. He slammed a fist against the podium. This is rigged! You're all against me! The moderators, the media, this entire audience, it's all one big setup to make me look bad. The words, once his shield, now sounded hollow, desperate. Obama turned slightly, addressing not just Trump, but the entire nation watching. There it is. Every time accountability catches up to Donald, he cries foul. Every time the truth corners him, it's suddenly a setup. Every time someone calls him out, it's fake news. But here's the thing, Donald, sometimes it's not a setup. Sometimes it's just reality. And reality is, tonight you disrespected my wife on national television. And in doing so, you disrespected millions of women who've had to endure men like you belittling their worth. And the reality is, you're not equipped to handle the backlash because deep down, you know they see through you. The audience roared, some standing on their chairs, cameras flashing as the moment crystallized into something larger than politics. Trump, cornered, tried one last line of attack, his voice trembling with fury. You think you're better than me, Barack. You think Michelle's better than Melania. You think you're some kind of moral compass for this country. You're nothing without your fancy speeches. You're nothing without her. Obama paused, inhaled slowly, and then delivered the line that would be replayed for decades. He stepped forward, his voice steady, his eyes locked on Trump. Donald, I don't need Michelle to prove I'm something, but the fact that you can't stand in her shadow without lashing out, that proves everything about you. The hall erupted like a stadium after a championship win, the cheers shaking the walls, drowning out whatever Trump tried to say next. The moderators sat in stunned silence, unable to regain control as the audience transformed into a living wave of support, chanting Michelle's name again and again. Trump's face twisted with fury and humiliation, but the cameras caught every flicker, every crack in the mask. For the first time It wasn't Obama's words alone that destroyed him. It was the undeniable truth reflected in the crowd's response. In that moment, Trump wasn't just debating Obama. He was debating the nation itself, and he was losing. The chaos inside the auditorium was almost uncontainable now, the chants rising louder, echoing off the marble walls until they sounded like waves crashing against a cliff. Michelle! Michelle! Michelle. It wasn't just applause anymore. It was a declaration, a collective refusal to let Trump's insults stand unanswered. The moderators looked at each other in disbelief, their hands frozen over note cards, as if they knew this moment had slipped beyond their control and into history. Trump, red, faced and seething, jabbed his finger at Obama, his words spilling out in furious fragments. This isn't fair. This is a witch hunt. You're all just jealous. You, your wife, the media, everyone. You've been against me from the start. I made this country great. I built an empire. And you? You just talked. His voice cracked at the end, desperate and shrill, more a plea than a declaration. Obama, however, remained motionless, his composure unshaken, his silence heavier than Trump's rage. He finally leaned into the microphone, his voice calm but commanding, the kind of voice that could cut through any storm. Donald, you don't get it. This moment, it isn't about me. It isn't even about Michelle. It's about the millions of women you've disrespected with comments just like the one you made tonight. It's about the people you dismiss, the communities you mock, the truths you bury under insults and fear. And it's about the fact that no matter how much noise you make, no matter how many walls you build, you can't silence the truth. Not tonight. Not ever. The audience roared again, but this time their applause carried a different tone. It wasn't just excitement, it was vindication. Even the camera seemed to lean toward Obama, framing him as the anchor in the storm, while Trump appeared smaller, diminished, swallowed by his own fury. Trump tried to shout over the crowd, but the words tangled together, incoherent, a man unraveling on live television. I made America strong, stronger than you ever did. You ruined it. You ruined everything. His fist slammed down on the podium, but the sound was drowned out by the thunderous chants of the audience. For the first time in his career, Trump wasn't in control of the narrative. He wasn't dominating the stage. He was being drowned by it. Obama let the noise crest and then, with perfect timing, delivered the final blow. His voice, steady and sharp, cut through the chants like a blade. Donald, strength isn't about tearing people down. It isn't about mocking women, bullying immigrants, or turning neighbors into enemies. Strength is measured by how much you can lift others up, even when it costs you. And that's why you'll never understand Michelle, and why you'll never understand this country. Because America doesn't belong to men who try to make themselves big by making others small. The words landed with devastating precision. The audience shot to their feet as one. The ovation so fierce that it shook the cameras on their stands. Some of the moderators tried to restore order, but it was useless. The energy in the room had transcended politics. It was no longer a debate. It was a reckoning. Trump, realizing he had lost, slammed his notes shut and tried to storm off stage. But in doing so, he walked straight past Obama, who didn't flinch, didn't move an inch. The camera caught it. The perfect image, one man consumed by rage and humiliation, walking away, while the other stood tall, calm, resolute, a symbol of dignity under fire. The chants didn't fade. As Trump exited, they grew louder, rolling into the hallway, spilling into the streets outside where crowds had gathered to watch on massive screens. Millions watched at home, their social media feeds exploding with clips of Obama's final words, with hashtags like "Faye strength is lifting" and "Faye, Michelle deserves better" trending within minutes. In one night, the narrative had flipped. Trump hadn't just lost an argument. He had lost the room, the cameras, and the nation's respect. And as Obama finally stepped back from the podium, his face calm, but his eyes blazing with quiet intensity, he didn't need to say another word. The silence he carried with him as he walked off stage was louder than any roar, a silence that told the world some battles are won not with fury, but with unshakable truth. And in that silence, Trump's collapse became complete.